Ice Spice has gotten herself into some recent drama with her Y2K tour, where fellow artist and her former friend, Cleo Trappa, posted a video detailing her issues with her experience on the tour, after Ice asked her to be a special guest on it. Ice responded, her manager responded, tons of people chimed in, and it was a whole thing. And so if you clicked on this video looking for me to give you my side about who's in the right, am I team Ice Spice, am I team Cleo, you're not gonna find that. That's not what I'm here to do. Their situation seems to be so deeply intertwined with personal issues that it feels impossible for me to really give like a valid take from the outside. Who really knows, you know? I know for sure that I don't know these people. And I will talk a little bit more about it at the end of the video, but just getting that out of the way. But what I did realize from following all of this discourse is that most people don't really know what it's like to be an opener on a tour. And it's not just fans. I would bet that plenty of artists who haven't done it don't really know what it's like either. And I don't have a crazy amount of experience being an opener on a tour, but I do have a little bit. And as somebody who has opened on a tour before and has submitted for plenty of other opportunities to open on tours and thus like seen what the business looks like, I can try my best to make it all make a little more sense. I did a video recently where I talked about arena tours, and along the way I talked a lot about the economics of touring in general. So if you haven't seen that video yet, it might be worth watching that one first. But in that video, I didn't really get into what the life of the opening act is like. So with a mix of research and a little bit of my own personal experience, let's find out what it's like to be the guy before the guy. But before we do all that, if you like videos on music, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. I post a video every week. If you want to see them early, go to my Instagram, HADJI Gaviota, throw me a follow, join my broadcast channel. I post all my videos in there one day early. Also wanted to say thanks for the love on my latest song, Showtime. And I'm letting you guys know first, I have a new song coming out on September 25th. It's called Come On Bruh with Rob Apollo. If you guys like the instrumental in the background, gives you an idea of what it's going to sound like. I'm going to put the pre-save link in the description. All right, back to the video. So let's set the stage. You're excited to see your favorite artist, and the ticket says doors at 7, show at 8. And if you get there at 8 p.m., odds are you're gonna see at least one artist go on before whoever you came there for. Out comes the opener. There's a long history of the opening act. In the 17th century, when the opera became a very popular form of performance in Italy, the overture was the word for the opening moment of an opera that really set the stage for what was going to come after. We can then jump into the 1800s, where the variety show became a popular format across the United States. A variety show is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mix of a bunch of different types of performances and acts. The order of those acts was decided by the promoters and the management, and surely eventually people realized it made sense to save the best for last. It's a simple concept after all. If there is a part of the act that is selling the most tickets, that people want to see the most, put it at the end so that people don't leave after it. So jumping ahead to today, right, there's really two simple reasons for openers and opening acts in general. One is to warm up the crowd, and the other is to keep people around long enough to buy more popcorn, more drinks, more merch, and more of whatever the venue is selling you. It's not just a music thing. Openers are also popular in sports like boxing, where there's usually a card for the fight. And in that card, there's multiple matches leading up to what they call the main event. John Bream wrote an excellent article about the opening act for the Minnesota Star Tribune in 2022. He took us through the 1900s, where the music industry really started to first take shape, and shows were often cross-listed between musicians and comedians who would open up for each other. And this culture was created, it was kind of born out of the Las Vegas show business. You still see some shows like this today. For example, Drewski opened on J. Cole's The Off-Season Tour in 2021 and 2022. And if you don't know Drewski, you probably recognize him from being on social media. He's a comedian. When Dave Chappelle did his Controlled Danger shows in 2017, he also had John Mayer on the bill with him. So there's a natural synergy there with musicians and comedians that you can kind of trace back to the 1950s and 60s and maybe even further back to the variety shows of the 1800s. That's enough history, and these are more unique examples. In general, if you're buying tickets to a concert, the opening act is probably going to be another musician. The question that a lot of people ask first is, how do they decide who's going to open a show? The answer is that it's going to depend on the musicians, on their agents, on their labels. And when it's in the hands of the artists, their motivations can vary. Some artists are going to pick musicians that they think are going to put on the best show possible. In Bream's article, he spoke to singer-songwriter Brandi Carlile about how she picks her openers, and she said, "I like to think about the whole arc of the evening for the audience. At the end of the day, I'm an entertainer more than a songwriter and more than a singer. So I like to choose my opening acts on what will be the most entertaining and enjoyable experience for everyone in the venue." From a more strategic or pragmatic standpoint, beyond just putting on a good show, there is a balance to picking an opening act who is similar enough to you that there's some overlap in the listenership, but also different enough that the artist is going to pull in some people who might not have bought a ticket otherwise. It's risky to have the artists on a bill be too different from each other, because then there's a chance that someone won't buy a ticket because they don't want to sit through the other artist, or they won't see the cost of the ticket as worth it, or it'll just create a vibe with kind of like a lack of cohesion. Everyone will look around like, what are we doing here? Like, you're not going to want to go to like a Gracie Abrams Destroy Lonely show. You know, it's not going to make a lot of sense for anybody. But it's also a missed opportunity to bring in some new listeners and some potential new fans if you pick an artist that's just like in the exact same lane as you. One recent example that I think shows the line being walked very well is the Ken Carson and 2 Hollis tour. 2 Hollis has picked up a lot of steam in his career after being embraced by the Opium audience. But on paper, that's probably not the most obvious guy to pair with Ken Carson. The overlap is there, and the potential cross-enjoyment between the fan bases is actually pretty huge, even if it doesn't really make sense on paper. And now it goes on the board as a success story for everyone involved. Artists who are in more of a position of power, who have a little bit more leverage, will sometimes use that to pick smaller artists that they genuinely just believe in. Taylor Swift has had a bunch of different openers cycle in during her Eras tour, and one of them is Griff, who told People magazine about how the opportunity came about from running into Taylor Swift backstage at a Kendrick Lamar show, of all places. I actually bumped into Taylor at a Kendrick Lamar concert in London. It was so surreal to see her there. We spoke a little, and I was congratulating her on everything, and she mentioned then at some point that she would love to have me as an opener on tour one day. I was dying. Well, I wasn't totally sure if I heard her correctly at first, but I watched the whole Kendrick show grinning ear to ear. Griff woke up to Taylor posting her song on her Instagram story. Almost 2 years after that moment, she got to share the stage with Taylor in London. Another artist I've covered on this channel, Dijon, got the chance to open for Bon Iver in a similar fashion. According to his interview with Pitchfork, his spot on the Bon Iver tour was at the invitation of Justin Vernon himself. Some artists will just straight up pick their friends to tour with them. You know, musicians become friends with each other after seeing each other around, and sometimes you just want to pick somebody you're gonna get along with, because you guys are gonna be on the road together for a long time. According to Bream's article, Taylor Swift told the newspaper that, on top of picking artists that she genuinely likes and wants to shine a light on, she likes to tap artists she likes to hang out with because they're on tour for weeks. It makes sense. Do you want to share a cramped van or a tour bus with someone that you don't vibe with? That's how you end up in an Ice Spice versus Cleotrapa type situation. There are plenty of other examples of artists bickering on tour as well, and I'll get into a few of them a little bit later. My one experience opening up on a tour came through the friendship path as well. An artist named Shy High, whose music I really like, and we were like social media mutuals, posted on his close friend's story something along the lines of, "Who wants to open my shows in Seattle and Portland?" And I thought it was the perfect opportunity for me since I hadn't gotten to play in the Pacific Northwest yet. I'm from New York, so most of my shows have been, in the East Coast or LA. And this would be a great way to introduce myself to new markets and a new audience. I know I had listeners there, but I hadn't shown my face around, So I replied, and he was down, and we went, and it was a lot of fun. It was much easier to go on tour with an artist that I already had a little bit of a rapport with, even if we hadn't met in person yet. And also somebody whose audience I had a feel for, since I could be included in that audience. I changed my set around from my normal set because I knew what Shy High listeners kind of liked. And it was cool getting to build a show that I felt like would have synergy with what was going to come after it. I've been on the other side of the headliner-opener relationship as well. When I did my own tour in 2023 for my album Wallflower, I played 3 dates in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. And I picked openers for each city based on who I knew there. I went with Huck in New York, Stefan Thev and Mako in Boston, and Sally Boy and Billy in Philly. I already knew these artists, and I knew that they either lived in those cities or they lived somewhere nearby or they were from there. So it was a cool way to get to collaborate with artists that I respect, while also bringing in people who were in the area. Because my tour was a shorter tour, I decided not to bring one opener with me on the road and just go with local acts in each city. There were 2 reasons for this. The first was that I was lucky enough to know a bunch of dope acts in each city. The second is that touring costs money, and so bringing people with you also costs money. We're gonna get further into the economics in a little bit. In most cases on a major tour, on a bigger tour, artists are touring with an opener or 2, either for the whole thing or on each leg of the tour, which might be divided with a little break in between. So let's go back to Ice Spice's Y2K tour and look at the poster. The tour says featuring Cash Cobain and sounds by Riot USA. There's a lot to unpack here just from this picture. The first thing that jumps out to me is what isn't written anywhere, and that's Cleotrapa's name. That's because she was added to the tour just a couple days before the North American leg kicked off, and she was considered a special guest. Without getting too far into this one particular situation, this is important to note because it's actually pretty common at shows, especially rap shows, that there will be more artists than might be originally advertised performing, in the form of special guests or what others in the industry might call local openers. So the actual billed opener on the tour was Cash Cobain. That makes sense for a few reasons. If you watch my video on him, then you know he's having an amazing year, and he's only really kept going up since I first covered him. He and Ice Spice have a song together, the remix to Cash's song For Sure, and they're both from the Bronx. There is some fan base overlap for sure. For sure, see what I did there? But they also operate in slightly different pockets of music, with Ice Spice coming from the female rap side, which comes with its own fan bases and its own beefs and its own affinities, and Cash being the captain of the sexy drill sound. Riot USA, who's Ice Spice's main producer, spun a DJ set throughout the tour, which is also pretty normal at rap concerts to have a DJ come out to hype the crowd. It's much easier to get a rap crowd hyped up at a concert playing like the Work remix in like sicko mode than it is to have like a random artist come out and play songs you've never heard before. So it makes sense. Artists pairing up for a show can help them fill in bigger venues that they might not have been able to on their own. Bonnie Raitt told Bream about this in the Star Tribune article. I can't draw the same number of people without having a significant co-bill. It's a great complementary situation. Not too similar, not too different. Some artists can gracefully share the stage and be co-headliners and take turns sharing the limelight. Neil Schon, the guitarist for the band Journey, just a small town girl living in a lonely world band, talked about their co-headlining tour with the band Def Leppard. We headline where we feel our fans are strongest, and Def Leppard headlines where they feel their fans are strongest. It's worked out just perfect. We've never been out with anyone we couldn't stand. Now, unfortunately, not all artists can say that. In my video on Party Next Door, I talked about his ill-fated tour with Jeremiah, where there was rustling and disagreement about the tour's billing right from the beginning. Was Jeremiah the co-headliner or the opener? If you look at the article that announced the show, it called Jeremiah the opener, but if you look at the poster, their names are billed together. It was kind of unclear, and after some shows went wrong, with Jeremiah's set in his hometown of Chicago being cut early, he sent out an angry tweet about it, and then later at the Houston show, he allegedly sent out a body double in a hoodie to lip sync his songs instead of performing. And the show after that in Dallas, he went on stage and cursed out Party Next Door and his fans. So co-headlining is not always sunshine and rainbows, especially when artists' egos come to play. At the end of the day, the music industry is a business. Drake said there's no friends in the industry, and look at who he's toured with and who he beefed with. I think he learned that the hard way this year. Touring is a part of the industry where business conflicts can lead artists to butt heads. As I talked about in my video on arenas, touring can also be more costly than a lot of people might realize. Some pretty high profile tours have been canceled this year, from the Black Keys to Jennifer Lopez. The equipment, the manpower, the transportation, a lot of it is getting more expensive as revenues drop, which is not a good combination. So if the strain on headlining acts is bad, imagine how bad it is for the openers. Let's talk a bit about the finances of being an opener in music. It's also really important to remember that no two tours are the same. I'm not here to pocket watch or speculate on what the deals were for artists if I don't know them, but I am going to go over some of the most common business models for opening acts in touring. The first one I'll talk about is a revenue percentage. This was what my tour with Shy High was like. I got a percentage of the proceeds of what was made off ticket sales. Everything else I had to figure out by myself. How I was going to get to Seattle, how I was going to get between Seattle and Portland, how I was going to pay everybody around me, what I was going to eat, where I was going to sleep, all that kind of stuff I had to figure out. But that's normal. One of the positives of this model is that you're directly rewarded for the show doing well, which incentivizes you to promote it, to go out there, get the word out, try to get fans in the seats. Shy High and his team were super easy to work with, fun to hang out with, and the communication was solid throughout. The theoretical downside to this model is that you don't actually know how much money you're going to walk away with, which if you're a big planner and you're really trying to schedule out how much money you're going to spend and how much money you're going to make, kind of difficult to know if you don't know how the tickets are selling or what's going to happen the day of. So basically, you're taking on a little bit of a financial risk by doing a tour opportunity like this. If the shows flop, then you're probably going to be in the red. The financial certainty is really important to a lot of artists, especially on a larger scale when more shows come into play and then more money is at stake. For me on the Shy High tour, because it was only 2 shows that I played, even if they were a flop, even if nobody came, eating the cost of like 1 weekend in the Pacific Northwest, it wouldn't ruin my life. The same can't be said for artists who are taking on bigger legs or longer tours, and we'll look at some of those in a little bit. Another option that's common for opening acts is to receive a set amount per show, a fixed amount. I was actually submitted for a tour like this last year by my team. I'm not gonna say what artist it was, but I'll tell you that I was offered $500 per show for the tour. Flat out. That might not sound too bad, but the costs do add up because that $500 is going to go towards a bunch of expenses, right? You have transportation, which is figuring out what vehicle you're going to use to get around, and then also all the gas that you have. You got to pay your bandmates if you play with bandmates. I like playing with a drummer, sometimes another person as well if I can fit it into the budget. You got to factor that in. You got to feed all those people. And then you got to find a place to sleep and, That's why a lot of people crash on couches when they're touring, because those hotels, they add up, even the cheap ones, you know? $500, as my old manager said at the time, I've seen worse. But $500, as my old manager said at the time, he's seen way worse. So I was down to do this, but I didn't get picked. I was on a short list, somebody else got picked. That's the business, no hard feelings. Later on, same year, I made it on the short list for another tour, but this time, instead of $500 a show, it was $250 a show. Now you can basically kiss making a profit goodbye. Maybe if you really squeeze it out, you could break even. If you sell a lot of merch, maybe you can make it possible. $250 a show, it's gonna go really fast when you're traveling and you're paying a drummer and you're paying for hotels if you don't have a place to crash. That is going to evaporate. And just like the last tour, made it to the short list, didn't get picked. Them's the breaks. At home, you might be asking, if the pay is so humbling, then why is it so competitive to get on these tours? In both cases, you know, I was one of maybe as many as like a dozen of artists who were being considered for the opportunity. And every single one of those artists, you know, they said yes before they got picked. They were all down. And this is because opening slots are seen more as marketing opportunities than they are as big money makers. Both of the tours that I was considered for what it's worth, either had shows sold out already or were on track to sell out by the time that they were trying to pick openers. Artists want to get in front of these fans, and you know, if my music aligns well enough with the artist that I would be opening for, then the payoff could be worth the financial risk or even eating a little bit of money. For a lot of artists, breaking even on early tours, well, obviously it's the preferable outcome. It's not always the goal. Barry Hefner, the president of Since the 80s, which manages artists like HADJI, has talked a lot about how the plan with HADJI was to get him on tour as much as possible early in his career so that he can build his fan base with electric performances and kind of win people over. So after the Ice Spice and Cleo drama hit the internet last week, Barry Hefner hopped on and sent out some tweets. Do y'all know how much a tour cost? You know how much a tour bus is? The gas, the driver, the hotels? Do most people know, unless you're in a certain size venue, you probably will just break even on the run? Do you understand that touring is just a marketing opportunity? Forget about breaking even on a run. There are situations like the Cleo Trappa one where an artist isn't even being paid at all. One artist, Capella Gray, chimed in on the conversation and talked about how when he was opening on a tour, he paid for his own bus and his own hotels, just to show people what it was like. He ended up deleting the tweet because it got a little too hot, but it's not like this guy is a nobody. If you're from New York, you've definitely heard his song Gialis. I mean, it's platinum. It's a great song also. He decided that the promotion of going on a tour would be worth the cost. But beyond just covering expenses, sometimes an artist will pay for the opportunity to open on a tour. Not just pay for transportation and stuff. I mean, like, literally pay the headlining artist to be the opener. It's common enough that people call it a tour buy-in. Obviously, people don't really talk about this publicly, but it does happen. One infamous example is with the band The Raskins, who paid $1 million to open for the legendary old band Motley Crue, and then were allegedly bullied by the band's crew to the point that they ended up suing them for $30 million. The tour was in 2014 and the lawsuit was filed in 2016, and unfortunately, I can't find any updates about what ended up happening there. Crazy story though. Most tour buy-ins are not like that for multiple reasons. One, they're usually not $1 million, and two, they usually don't end with people suing each other. There are older Reddit threads about buy-ins that place the price at maybe starting at around $10,000. Remember, it's not necessarily going to include transportation or include hotels, right? This is a fee that just goes to the headliner or their agency or something. Like, then you have to figure the rest of that out yourself. And if you're really good at selling merch, or you really have enough fans to find a way to make it make sense, or you're really trying to promote an album or something like that, then maybe it can make sense. A lot of bands in the past have decided that it was worth it. Or maybe their labels did and they put the money up. In 2016, Digital Music News reported that Cameron was charging openers $800 for a 15-minute slot on his Killa Season 2 tour. The same year, they also reported that Ghostface Killah and Raekwon were charging people $1,100 for the same 15-minute slot on their tour. Now, pay-for-play shows are an infamous enemy in whatever your local music scene is. And the buy-in is basically like the industry-certified version of that. These are just some of the examples that have leaked out to the regular people, but I bet there are a lot more examples out there. So we've seen how opening slots are not necessarily a financially lucrative opportunity, even on successful tours. Now I want you to think about that and combine it with what I've talked about in the Arenas video, where we looked at how a lot of tours are struggling. Where does that leave us? That means a slot that already wasn't particularly lucrative is gonna get squeezed even harder. Rachel Chinariri is a British artist who recently had to pull out of her opening slot on the Remy Wolf tour because she couldn't make it make financial sense. Let's hear it right from her. This year, I've invested all my savings and earnings into my shows, styling, and band to be able to tour. While my debut album has opened many amazing opportunities, the financial strain on touring has become too much. Despite my best efforts to secure funding for this incredible opportunity, it hasn't been possible. This is the tough reality of the music industry, whether you're signed or independent. I've explored every possible option to make this work because I adore Remy and her fanbase, and I was so excited to come to the States. However, I cannot justify the financial risk it would entail. She was set to do 8 shows on the tour, spanning a little over 2 weeks. I can't speculate on how she was going to get paid for the tour, if she was going to get paid at all, but it's not like this is some flop tour. Remy Wolf is killing it. She's playing back-to-back nights at the King's Theater in New York, which has a 3,000 person capacity. And with the shows still almost a month away at the time that I'm filming this, there are only a few specks of tickets left on the website. So even when the tour is successful, that doesn't mean the opener is eating off of that. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying at all or trying to imply that Remy Wolf is doing bad business. I mean, you can tell from the way that Rachel talked that she still adores Remy. It's just wasn't financially possible. As we saw in the Arenas video, margins are super tight, even for tours that you would think are really successful. And it's not necessarily the artist's fault or their decision for that to be the case. While costs for things like transportation and equipment rentals are going up, the amount of money that a headliner would have to pay the opener is not going up. The budget's not going up for that. And so, of course, the pool is narrowing. On top of that, Rachel Chinariri is a British artist. So to legally tour in the United States, she needs to get a petition-based O visa. In February, the cost for that type of visa rose from $460 to $1,655. That's an increase of over $1,000. You don't need to be a math teacher like me to know that that is a lot of money. Now, that $1,000 might not make or break someone's opportunity to tour, but it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But despite all the rising costs and the general lack of profitability in the space, demand for these opening slots is still sky high. At the end of the day, there's nothing better for your music than getting to be in front of a bunch of people who have already proven to like music enough to buy a ticket to go see an artist who might be kind of like you. And then you get the chance to win them over in person. And so that's the opportunity that Ice Spice bestowed onto her so-called friend Cleo Trappa. Now, when we look at the 6-part video that Cleo posted about her experience on the tour, and the way that Ice responded in a Twitter space, and some of the tweets that she sent out since, you can tell that the real issue here is not the actual tour. It's the relationship between these two artists. It's a personal issue. And I'm not really going to get into the details of all that because that's not what this YouTube channel is for. I'm sure somebody else on this website will cover it. A lot of the music industry's response, though, has been to pick on Cleo a little bit for being unprepared for the tour or unappreciative of the opportunity. Barry Hefner, Jid's manager again, had another tweet about the situation that goes along those lines. Nah. Did I just see where an up-and-coming artist was granted an opportunity to go on tour and they complained they wasn't treated fairly? Nah, honestly, this business is going to shit. I understand this reaction from the outside. But again, it seems to be that the real issue here was the clash of personalities on the tour, and the expectations and the messaging and the lack of communication. Cleo even said in another tweet that she knew she was unpaid and she didn't have a problem with that. But a lot of the fans' responses to this has made me realize that while people in the industry might understand that these opportunities are often unpaid or even paid for, fans might imagine that everything's all good on those tour buses. Everybody's eating crab legs and popping champagne. Even in my super limited experience touring, I can tell you that it's not as easy or profitable as it might look on the outside. At the end of the day, I think there's something for everybody to learn here. As a fan, if you're at the show, give the opener a shot. They're grinding and probably spending some of their own money to put on a good show for you. Whether that's directly or indirectly or through the opportunity cost of them not being at their day job or their 9 to 5, give them a chance. I'll give you an example. I went to a show in 2014 in Philadelphia to see Kyle. Kyle was opening for Watsky. When I got to the venue, there was an opener there. He was supposedly Watsky's tour drummer. And this dude was up there. He was drumming, he was singing, he was rapping, sometimes all of them at the same time. And I left that show being wowed. I was like, I need to look this guy up. And his name was Anderson .Paak. Take that as an example of who your random opener can be. Give that person a shot. You really don't know. At the very least, you get the bragging rights of saying you saw them in a venue with like 25 people. Now, as an artist, if you're just starting out doing shows, do not do pay-for-play shows. Don't take my section of this video talking about the buy-in as like an example of what is normal. Like it happens in the industry at a higher level, but that random dude in your music scene, wherever you live, who's like charging you $100 to play in like a 3/4 empty room or a bar somewhere, that is not the way to the top. Don't do that. Never do pay for play shows. And for artists who are gearing up to maybe open on a tour or go out on their own headlining tour. Remember that communication is key. There's no such thing as too much planning. Iron out as many of the details as possible, as early as possible for everybody involved. And while it's not always possible, try to get a vibe for what the artists are like so you can make sure you guys are actually going to get along. As always, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you want me to cover next. Peace.